of the faculty forum, and we can start by anybody asking a question to us. Does anybody want to do that, or are we on our own again? So I think it would be nice to start, again, you know, some of us here, as you know, I studied with Menachem Presser, but Christopher studied with, and what about you, Roberta? Did you?
No, he judged me at the Clyburn, and then I became his colleague. And
So I think it would be nice to honor him again, because everybody has, I mean, he was an icon, and the trio was just incredible. And I think it would be nice to say a few words since he just recently passed away. And I'll let Christopher, if you want to say something about Menachem. I know he was a big influence.
Absolutely a big influence. I went to him. I first heard him live at the Wim Capel competition. He was a juror, and in those days they asked all the jury, or many of the jury, to play recitals before or during the competition. And I heard him play, and his sound was so joyful. I couldn't believe it. It was very light and happy. And then I started listening to his recordings with the trio, and I found that it had the same sound. So I wanted to go to him and learn his sound, as it were. And what I found when I studied with him was that it was like studying with fire. He didn't let anything go past in a way. As a matter of fact, he was the first one to tell me that something I was doing was bad, just bad. That was really shocked. I mean, I'm sure I've done plenty of bad things in my life, but he actually said, "No, that's bad," and he would yell. It was very, very shocking. But I learned so much just from learning how to see out of his eyes about how to approach music, how to love music, and how to understand it with your life in a way. It was quite astonishing.
Anybody?
Yeah, well, commitment. He would never miss a faculty meeting, despite, you know, his age, despite having health problems. He would always be there. Sometimes getting asleep during the meeting, but then always ready to, you know, to be attentive and positive during the meetings. I also remember when I didn't know him yet, when I did the Clyburn then was filming a series of episodes with the jury members, and each jury member would talk about something in particular, and Menachem focused on the title of the mini film was Spirit or Technique, and I was featured in that, and I didn't know it at that time. I saw it much later, and he was speaking about how we can compare and how we can decide how much spirit, how much technique, if there's a limit in both of those things, and how we can mix this. And he was talking about my performances at the Clyburn, so I will always remember this.
So what did he say specifically about the mix? Can you remember?
I should go back and watch the video, but basically he was talking about the fact that, in his opinion, technique itself would not make anything really interesting. And that's what I remember about his music making. It was just incredibly interesting all the time, whatever he would play.
That's a kind of one of the things that I really loved about his teaching was he had this way of always focusing you, and he would not focus on anything intellectual. It always was about sound, or you might even say the soul of the music, the essence of what he thought the music was, and that was, so it was always including, you know, it was very emotional, and I think, well, I mean, that's one of the things I love about your teaching, of your, you know, because you have that Pressler energy. I can see, I really, really can feel that intensity, you know, and focus. And I think that everybody that came into contact with him got a piece of that, what I called last week sunshine. It was just some kind of emotional nourishment that I really, you know, it kind of filled you up, and you can still, I'm sure you can still draw on that.
I think Stephen was there as well during Presser's. Did you ever play for him? Or?
I knew Mr. Presser quite well, but I never studied with him because when I was a kid, I studied with two of his favorite students. these two sisters, the Haddad sisters, you might have known them during their time, and he was always very interested in this fact. And so it gave me a kind of special access to him that I had as not one of his students. And I remember a couple of things. You were talking about his commitment. I like to practice very late at night, and I ran into him one time at 2:30 in the morning in the building. And I said, Mr. Pressler, what are you doing here? And he said, well, I just finished a concert, and I had this shuttle, the airport shuttle, drop me off at the school, and I sleep on a cot underneath the piano
That's right.
so that I'm ready to teach first thing in the morning.
So
And
this was past the time when he would drive to school every morning? 'Cause-
Well, this was right from the airport in
I
Indianapolis.
know, but why didn't he
Yeah.
go home? He didn't live very far from school.
Well, it saved him time.
Right.
He was ready to go, just woke up and taught. And he told me once, he said, because we were talking about some musical topic, and he reflected, I'll never forget this, he said, it's so much better to meet a lover of music rather than a player of music.
That's such a great.
That's a great thing. Something else related to the sound. The pianos in Pressler's studio at IU were the worst pianos of the whole college.
So,
And he wanted that. He used to say that he wanted the worst pianos in his studio so that his students could really work on sound. And if they would sound good on those instruments, then they probably would learn something about sound.
so when I was there, and actually, Spencer Meyer, who's going to be here, he just got in touch with me because he was so excited because they moved Pressler's
Yes, he
piano,
told me.
the D, into his
Yeah.
studio, which he considers the piano of all pianos, Spencer does. And when I was there, that was a lovely piano. I wouldn't say that it was the piano of all pianos, but it was a really beautiful piano. And I could see why Pressler really loved the sound of it. But I never had the impression that they were the worst pianos in the school. I just thought that all the pianos in the school
Were bad.
school pianos.
Of course.
School pianos
That's
were
for
bad
sure.
pianos.
But still, among the bad pianos.
But
they
that
were
piano
the worst.
lives on now.
Yeah.
In Spencer Meyer's studio. It's too bad that everybody can't be here at once. Then we would have a really interesting get together. So, okay, so my question of the festival is, which is what I asked last week's group, and everybody of course has a different answer. So when you teach your students, or when students play for you that aren't your students, how do you help them access their own imagination and, sort of step into their spiritual and imaginative and, what their own soul and voice wants without necessarily imposing your own interpretation? Who would like to go first?
I'll try
Thank
to answer
you.
that. I try to do that by focusing on the details of the music and suggesting things which could be exploratory, spiritually, so to speak. So those can be details. For example, Mr. Pressler, I played for, this is before any of you guys, in 1949.
Woo! Barely even born.
He was, this was in Philadelphia, and he was a young big star because Ormandy had made a great fuss over him. And somebody invited me and asked me to play for him. I played the third Chopin scherzo. And he said, Busoni used to tell students that when the second theme came in minor, in E minor, to get much slower. And that was kind of revelatory for me. And many years later, our paths crossed in different ways, including in the club. And I didn't expect him, of course, he remembered that he knew me, and I said to him, you said that Uzoni used to say such and such. And he said, yes, that's what I used to say, which I found very interesting. He didn't commit himself to it, but yes, it was a way of opening something. And I, in teaching, try to do that, not so much by saying, you can sound more spiritual here, or think of angels in the sky, but rather finding a way of phrasing that opens the conceptual possibility.
Personally, what I ask my students when we talk about those things is to forget that we're pianists. I usually tell them that we're the worst musicians because we have to spend so many hours at the keyboard finding out how technically to solve questions that are, I would say, rather mechanical, other than spiritual. And the way we produce the sound is rather mechanical, much more mechanical than any other instruments that I know. And so the way we imagine the sound is different from the way that any string player would imagine the sound. And so if we commit to the instrument and we just think about the possibilities of the instrument, then it's very, very hard to forget that we're musicians, first of all, and instrumentalists later, after being musicians. So
I think one of the things that I personally am running into here with the people that I've taught so far is it seems that, and we might be coming out of this phase a little bit, everybody is devoted to piano, of course, but a little bit maybe too devoted to practicing just from the mechanical end of it to get play all the right notes in the right time, more or less. I say more or less because I don't think you can have any time without rubato in music. I mean, and so, I mean, if you put in the mechanical time and the notes, then, and then plan to add the expression later, the expression part is really neglected. I mean, it doesn't really work very well. It's sort of like, well, it's even worse than cooking without spices. I mean, it's just...
Actually, Xian Zhang asked me a question this morning of how do you approach an entirely new piece, and a piece that no recordings, no nothing. And I gave her kind of an answer that even surprised myself, but I've been thinking about it for many years, which is I try to make absolutely no assumptions about the piece till I get some idea of what it sounds like. So in some sense, I will start exactly mechanistically, and then start listening to what comes out.
But you're listening to what comes out.
Right, but the point is that I don't want to, well, not when it's at 1/10 of tempo yet, but the idea is I don't want to turn the next piece into the last piece. And I want to be open to how it is unlike anything I've done before.
You know, we have this dreamscape coming up in a couple days, and I don't think anybody has brought this new repertory into lessons, but I mean, this is a perfect example. There are no recordings of these pieces. Well, they just have been written for the festival. Some are more complicated, others are not complicated. Maybe, you know, like you start to play the notes and you get an emotional charge, or it's in a couple places, or I don't even want to say what my preferences are about these pieces, because that part of it is we're going to meet the composers and they're going to talk about them and play them. So these are pianists playing their own works that have never been heard before, and, you know, we'll have an interesting time. But obviously, there are certain pieces that you say, oh, wow, you know, have some kind of, or you can have, ugh, that
But
reaction
even
to,
that, ugh,
but
shouldn't
then,
it might be a first reaction,
right.
but it might not be a reaction a week later.
But that's right, but so in other words, you have to kind of go beyond that. But all of these are human reactions. I mean, so the basic thing is when you walk into the practice room, I mean, you can walk into a practice room at night and not turn on the light and just sit there in the dark and wiggle your fingers. But mostly you have to turn on the light. That means to awaken yourself in some way, awaken your humanness. So you receive something and make it an occasion. No, because we don't know how it's going to turn out. I mean, certainly not with new music, but even if you're playing old music, you really don't know how it's going to turn out. So I don't know how that, so that's sort of my question, I mean, is how to, most of you, you know, practice a little bit too much with your just parking lights on and not your headlights on. And I'd like you to turn on your high beams and make light for yourself.
Well, from the teaching perspective, you know, your posing of your original question, how you would approach students that you maybe see for one time in the festival versus someone that you work with regularly. I think they're very different experiences. I know the one-time lessons that we have here, or even it also happens in master classes. One of the things I will often ask the student after they've played is, how do you think it went? Are there places that frustrate you? Is something annoying? Are you struggling with something? Because the person that cares most about their playing is that player. So they're really focused on, you know, what they're trying to get to. So I will often start it that way. Of course, I've made several notes in the score of things that I would like to say, but that can often guide you to their anxiety level, their concerns, etc. And I think that, you know, it's their perspective. So I'll often go at it that way. The teaching of people over a long period of time, say in someone's studio, a year, 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, whatever, I think that relationship, going to the human side of it, is partially the relationship almost of a psychotherapist with a patient. And because you have a long-term goal of what you're trying to help this person with their playing and the development as an artist. And I see the studio class or these type of class meetings as group therapy. And they kind of comment each other, talk about each other. So they're very, very different experiences. But it's there's a certain freshness, of course, to the one time for the student as well as for the teacher. But also for the teacher in that one-time setting, you don't have the long-term responsibility. So you have to be careful, because you all will do this in the future. You must be sensitive to that teacher who is working long-term with that particular patient or that particular pianist. There may be a certain trajectory they're trying to get the person on, not to disturb that trajectory, but try to, you know, give support, enhance, enlighten, etc.
You know, to follow up on that and get back to your original question, it's not easy to do. Because as a performer, you've naturally gone through the score, and you have very strong feelings about how something should go or should not go. And yet, as the teacher, I guess, especially here, one of my great goals is simply to inspire and also to cultivate a sense of wonder about the music. And I think humility is important. Humility is very important. As the older I get, I start to even hate the word masterclass. It suggests some sense of end, some mastery, when really you're just my junior colleagues, and we're all on the same path. I will say it reminds me of the story of Mr. Presley, that when I was a student, at the end of my studies, the book by the great pianist, his notebooks of Sviatoslav Richter came out. And in these notebooks, Richter crucifies every pianist in the world, especially himself. He's very critical of himself. But there in the book was a little passage about the Beaux-Arts trio. And he said, I heard the most wonderful pianist in the Beaux-Arts trio. His name's Menachem Pressler. And he plays with such a sense of joy. And he inspired me. His performance was really inspiring. And I want to learn the Archduke myself. And it was an unusually positive review. That book had come out just a few days before the Beaux-Arts trio were to play their annual summer concert. And so I brought the book along because it was so brand new and I wanted to show it to Mr. Pressler. And so after the concert, I met him and I said, Mr. Pressler, would you sign this book? It mentions you. I said, did you see this? And he reached into his pocket and he had a copy of it. And he said, I heard about this. Someone told me about it. He said, these good words I kept for good luck.
That's so typical.
That is.
So that was so humble of him to keep. He was so flattered to have these words that Richter had said about him.
Questions? Yes.
My name is Kilo, and I'm currently studying at IA with Professor Roberto. And I want to ask you, since you all professors are traveling a lot more than us, and I want to know the strategy how you manage with the jet lag or like going to the
Jet lag.
Jet lag. In this case.
Ask the last two over there, they're jet lagged.
Continue the question.
competition period, we go there at least like 1 day before, and we have to get used to everything, like the new environment. And I just want to know how you manage with that.
Well, it depends. So, in my case, I think it depends very much on how you deal with stress and with fatigue and those things. I remember, when I was your age, it was easier, of course. It's not that easy now. For instance, I came from Europe last night. I arrived at 11 p.m. At a hotel because my flight was late. This morning at 5:15 a.m. I had a Zoom call because I'm buying a house in Italy. So I had to talk with the lawyer this morning at 5:15. And then the talk went longer than I thought, so I couldn't go back to sleep. And then I came here and I talked the whole morning. And I don't think that my students realized that I was jet lagged. I hope so, at least. But you deal with it because you like so much what you do. My secret is, if it's a secret, just don't think that you changed time zone. And don't think that you're tired. Just go on.
In other words, don't think of jet lag as a phenomenon, but something which you might use to explain the fact that you're feeling tired. And if you're feeling tired, then put a special effort into what you're doing.
Exactly.
And it will be fun.
Yeah, even more passion. Yeah. This year I was teaching at IU and teaching in Italy too at the same time. So I crossed the ocean probably, 25 times. I'm still here, alive.
One good thing you might have to look forward to, I think as I've gotten older, jet lag is easier because as you get older, you don't need as much sleep. You're very young and you need a lot of sleep. And I remember when I was young and would travel abroad and all that, it would really hit me badly, like it probably does you. As I've gotten older, it's just like another insomniac night. But truly, as we get older, you need less sleep. So in my life, it affects me, but not as much as when you're young.
I left Budapest yesterday at 4 a.m. And I got here last night at, 7 o'clock p.m. And if there's a trick, it's just don't get acclimated wherever you are. And then it's not too bad. But I will tell you, a few years ago, I flew from Italy to do another festival at Colburn, And I traveled with a pianist, and that pianist had played a large program just the night before we left, and we left on the same car very early in the morning from Italy. And he played Chopin Third Sonata, Liszt 104, Petrarch, a number of pieces. It was a substantial program. And then we arrived 2 days later in Colburn, very early in the morning, and here he comes, and I said, I'm looking forward to your performance again of Chopin Third Sonata. He said, oh no, I'm not playing that, I'm playing a different program, I'm playing Hammerklavier. And I was amazed by this, and this pianist is on the stage, is Professor Lowenthal. So he's the one who jet lag really doesn't affect him, obviously, at all. Do you remember that?
No, but it sounded familiar when you told me. I must know that person, but I...
Yes.
Another question? Yes.
So when you have to play a long solo set, do you have any particular strategies of practicing on the day of the performance? Do you practice a lot? Do you just run through the program or anything else?
Yeah, I think that is very, very.
I didn't hear all the question, but ideally, you play the program for your friends, maybe for your tape recorder.
She's talking the day
The
of.
day of the
Oh,
concert.
the day of.
Yeah.
Oh. Get enough, don't worry if you didn't sleep the night before. That's the main thing, because you might not have. You might be really nervous, and it doesn't matter. So don't worry about that.
I don't practice much at all the day of a major concert. And as it gets closer to the day of the concert, I don't frantically practice in the days before more. You know, I try to, earlier on is that type of intensive preparation, but as it gets close, I try to lighten up the day before, and particularly the day of, maybe lightly go through it once, because I think you want to keep the body and the mind especially, and the spirit as fresh as possible, so that when you get on the stage and you go to play, there's an immediacy. But everybody's different. There are some people that practice like crazy the days before, the day of. I hear students particularly, they'll be in the practice room, but my late husband used to say, don't leave it all in the practice room. All that energy and that wonderful music. Save some of it for the stage. So
Yeah, I
it's
think
personal.
you have to find your way of getting ready for the night. I remember, I don't know if it was Neuhaus or another old master writing in his book that the day of the performance he would practice everything incredibly slow with no expression from start to end. And this was good for him. If I would do something like this, I would go crazy and I would not be able to play at night. So I think it very much
It's
depends on how you feel, and you have to find your own way.
And I'll offer two small anecdotes about really great pianists. Gilels was said that he had a tradition on the concert day to not play one note of the program that night. Instead, the concert day was the day that he would start his new repertoire for the next program. And he said it gave him a sense of joy to go to the piano and not feel this dread before the concert. And yet, at Verbier a few years ago, I was there to attend the Sokolov concert, and he was practicing from the morning
very much.
until
The last
the
minute.
very last second
Always does that.
of the concert. He was practicing like a fiend, repeating passage after passage after passage.
Yeah, very much.
I was amazed by the energy that this must have taken.
And then there are the artists, like Richter, who would practice 7 hours after the concert.
So true.
Yes.
But it's important, I think, all these things are quite true. It's important to remember that that's going to change throughout our life and for the pieces. So you're not practicing the same way all the time. You're not learning the piece the same way all the time. So you have to be open, as Ursula was saying, to to every new circumstance, and just to make sure that your brain and your body are there, whatever that means. If you're jet lagged, or if you're not tired, or if you know the pieces well, or if you don't know them well, then you have to be practicing up to the last minute or something like that. Or if you're like Roberto and have energy to spare all the time. So I mean, it really just depends upon each situation.
So Augie Zerker was my teacher, and actually this was corroborated by Leon Fleischer, who I asked. Apparently Schnabel would do this for himself and send his students for a walk outside, at least go for a half-hour walk the day of the concert and appreciate the beauty of the earth, the beauty of, I guess if you're in the snow, personally it's very hard for me to appreciate, but the beauty of nature, and breathe and feel the gift that, what a pleasure it is to be able to enjoy this beautiful music and share the magic of whatever pieces of music you're playing. And that would, the idea was, which I learned when I was little, when you walk around like that, you just sort of, you're in awe of everything that we value and treasure and the gift of life, and that when you come in and sit down at the piano, when you start to listen to these sounds, I mean, it's just an amazing experience. So that's one way where you can, it's not a bad idea to do this every day, by the way. Just give yourself this renewal.
When I was competing in the Cleveland competition, I played my semifinal, had a little memory problem at the end of Brahms Sonata, Opus 5, and I thought I was out. So I was devastated after the performance, and we had one more day to wait for the results. But I was devastated. I was thinking I was out, but still I was so committed that I wanted to perform, to practice my concerto for the finals, because you never know in a competition. My host mother, so in competitions they put you with host families, she saw that I was so devastated because of that mistake. She forced me not to practice for the whole day, waiting for the results. I never drove in America. She let me drive her car even if I didn't have a driver license. And she took me to see an Amish community, which I only saw the Amish community in movies like Witness. And so she wanted me to experience something as a European guy in America. I didn't touch a key that day, and I was feeling so guilty. But at the same time, this helped me so much, and then by miracle, I went on. And actually, the concerto didn't need that extra day of practice, apparently, because then competition ended well. So that's exactly what you said.
This brings up the whole question of how much you should practice.
It does.
When I was young, I practiced very little. And then I played for Rubinstein when I was 17. And he said, "How much do you practice?" And I said, "I'm afraid not more than 3 hours a day, Mr. Rubinstein," which was true, but it didn't mean that I practiced 3 hours a day. And he said, "You must never practice more." So that was very good advice. Well, the next year, I met William Capell, and he said, "How much do you practice?" And I said, it had worked so well with Rubinstein. I said, "I'm afraid not more than 3 hours a day, Mr. Capell." He said, "Well, if you work with me, you'll have to do at least 5. So, a couple of days later, I won't try to explain this, but I was in the country, and I came out of the store, and whom should I meet but the violinist Michael Rabin, whom you may or may not have heard of, but he was 3 years younger than I, and he was already a famous virtuoso. And he was introduced to me, and he said, "You're a pianist. How much do you practice?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to practice 5 hours a day, but finding it very difficult." He looked at me incredulously. He said, "You practice from 8 to 1, it's 5 hours. And for years I used to think about that. Yes, you practice from 8 to 1, it's 5 hours. I could never do it. And eventually I gave up the mere idea. But finally, when it comes to this, people do different things. And you'll find Sometimes you simply have to play more in order to fulfill the commitments that you've made. Other times you don't.
I don't know if people ask anymore. I mean, when I was growing up, it seemed like the thing. How much you practice? But now, nobody's talking about it anymore. I mean, I don't hear anybody.
Because they all practice 9 hours per day.
Or maybe they don't talk about it. Do you talk about how much you practice every day?
I do.
You do? Anybody else?
I have like a diary.
You do?
Yeah, and I
Does anybody else have a diary?
how much I practice every day. So
What happens when you deviate? Do you punish yourself?
I just try to make my discipline better. If I see it's like getting lower and lower, I'm like, I have to make it lower.
Why? Maybe it's a good thing to have it a little lower.
Yeah, but sometimes we need to practice more.
Sometimes it's good to take a break. I mean, it can really be energizing and freshening.
Yeah. Richter kept a diary, kept a practice diary, and years ago they published Capel's practice diaries,
Yes.
which are very interesting because they're incredibly practical. He
Yes.
wouldn't spend time working on things which he already knew, and I found a great deal of.
What kind of things can you?
He would write down Prokofiev's 7th Sonata, 15 minutes. That means he goes through all the hard spots and he would say, okay, I went through all the hard spots. But then he would say, he would say, Rockpag, 2 hours, 45 minutes. And then he'd make a comment
Yes.
about it.
Yes. He practiced too much, of course, and that would have caught up with him, and he was changing, and in his last concerts in Australia, he was becoming somebody else, and that's all. I don't know how much you know about William Capel, but he was a great pianist and a great virtuoso, and obsessed with practicing, actually, and obsessed with smoking cigarettes, so that his piano was always covered with cigarette ashes.
How many cigarettes could he smoke while he was practicing at the same time?
He had an ashtray on the
But I mean,
piano.
Could he play?
Well, he didn't play with the cigarettes between his fingers, but every time he had a rest. If he wasn't playing with the right hand.
One of the most phenomenal things I saw was, Schubert used to, smoke up a storm, and I just hated to be around him when he was smoking because I had cancer. I mean, I just really didn't want to go there. One day, as he was smoking in the studio, I said, Mr. Schubert, how many cigarettes can you smoke at once? He said, watch this. And he did, I can't remember what it was, which Schubert or whatever it was, but he had 2 cigarettes. Lit cigarettes, and 2 cigarettes here, and off he went. And I mean, I'm so sorry there weren't video cameras like that. I've never seen anything like it. And after, it must have been a minute or so, he said to Roberto, would you take this cigarette and put it out? So then he only had 1 cigarette again. It was fantastic. You mean while he was smoking?
Well,
Or
Capel
in
used to
general?
cough.
He never
And
smoked.
I remember I played in a concert that he arranged once, and while I was playing, I could hear very distinctively the Capel cough coming.
No, he didn't cough much. I mean,
I don't know if you know Dino Ciani. Dino Ciani was a great, of course, my colleagues know him. He was a great Italian pianist. He died young, unfortunately, in a car accident. But there's a great out of doors, for instance, Bartok, if you go online. He used to practice, so before starting practicing, he would do 2 hours of technique, raw technique at the piano, reading a newspaper.
Going back, though, to the idea of taking a walk before a concert, I found that it's very helpful to take a walk before practicing while you think about what are you going to practice, what do you want to accomplish, what is confusing about the piece you're playing. All those things are, in a way, solved far better while taking a walk.
I agree totally with you.
This discussion of cigarettes brings back a memory. I don't know if it was the case at the Juilliard School, but I know when I was a student at Peabody, I'm sure it's not that way anymore, but those days, it's the 1970s, so students smoked, professors smoked in the classroom, there's smoking going all over the place. So the students that smoked, they would put the cigarette like at the very top keys or bottom keys, and you'd come in there, and they would be slightly brown or burned on, because the cigarette had gone.
Oh.
Like, that's what students would do, because there weren't ashtrays in the thing. Did you ever see that in the Juilliard practice rooms? Way back, when the kids were.
We had ashtrays.
No, Peabody did not. They had like this, I remember that very distinctly.
Good thing the building didn't burn down.
Yeah.
So what we're saying is that things are better
Well,
these
oh,
days.
so-
Yes, I think generally that this is the golden age of piano playing. And the lack of cigarette ash is one little factor.
Another question? Yes.
So this is a personal case for my own self. Like I have an experience like before concert, like one night before concert, I cannot fall into sleep since my brain is keep playing the music that I'm going to play next day at the concert. So I really cannot fall into sleep. And one night after my concert, I also cannot sleep because the music that I just played in the concert is still like put in my head. So it influenced like my day of the concert. I focus very much because I didn't sleep well. So is there any recommendations for?
Go to the movies. Go to movies.
I actually think it's not a bad thing that the music was in your brain. It means that you actually own it. It's something that I ask my students to do if they have it in their brain without moving their fingers. That means that you really own the piece. I don't think it's a negative thing. Of course, it's negative not to be able to sleep. But as they said, don't think about.
Okay.
And it's also not unusual to have it play the day after, the night after.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's often the case.
But that sounds like you are dealing with something more than nerves about the concert. If you are thinking that maybe your whole self-worth is how the concert goes, as it were, then we really focus on it because I have to do very, very well. But nobody is going to come to your concert to see you prove yourself. I don't go to hear any pianist today just to see that Marta Argerich is still Marta Argerich or something like that. So, I mean, that I go to learn something and to love something, and if we can do the same thing, and by the way, I'm kind of preaching to myself, not just to anybody else, but it's, I think, to put our purpose in the right place is the best and hardest thing to do, but the most important thing to do, so that we aren't always nervous the day before the concert or the week
Amen to
before.
that. That's perfectly said, yeah. Agreed. Anybody else? Yes.
Okay, so it's personal as well. A few of us are graduating from DMA degree, and we're just wondering, like, if you have any advice or suggestions for career development, or how can we find jobs?
At the conclusion or during getting a DMA? Are you looking as you're doing your DMA, or you're
After conclusion.
Okay, finishing.
Well, it's a good question, Rebecca, because I'm
Yeah.
sure everybody has their own experience with this, but I think to be thinking about the job at the end of the DMA is a little bit late these
I agree.
days. So when you enter the DMA, you want to be thinking about the job from day one. What you're going to study, how you're going to study it, how you are going to do other activities besides your curriculum so that you can graduate with a CV that shows that you have ideas and that you've done things and so forth. So that's not saying that it's too late to be thinking about it right now. It's not like you're not going to get a job or anything like that. But the more in advance you can be thinking, the more you can follow the listings on College Music Society or wherever else you might look for jobs, then you can start seeing what is required and how the job language is changing.
And do things that build your
Right.
resume, part-time work, whatever. I mean, the days are over where you get your stamp, I finished my DMA, and you apply to 20, 30, let's say if there are jobs, and you know you're gonna get one. It doesn't work that way anymore, because the degree does not guarantee that you're going to get anything.
We're all college professors, but I'm sure we would all agree school is not the only thing that you have to do, and maybe the last thing that you have to think about while you are in school. I will have my students coming for the first year of masters asking me during the first lesson, I want to prepare my DMA audition program. What? First lesson of the master's program? Of course I would get furious, because that's not what you have to think about when you start the master's program, because you have so much to learn, so many things to do in order to make your CV interesting.
But
I did have a case of somebody who, on the first day of undergrad, when he was only 16, said to me, I want to think about my DMA audition. And I said, are you crazy? But he was quite serious, and he did it. You know, he prepared everything, and he got his DMA, and he's lived happily ever after. But it's very dangerous to think this way, because you need to open your mind and your possibilities and to learn repertoire, and not think, well, I have to learn a classical sonata and a romantic
And
sonata.
also, the world is changing. You know, in 5 years from now, things are going to be different. The world is always changing, and opportunities are changing. It's an adventure. So I think that, you know, you need to open yourself to possibilities wherever you are living.
But one of the things, while you're at school with a lot of other wonderful musicians. And the more you can play with them, the more you can play their music, the more you will start on the friendships, or continue on the friendships that become your lifelong friendships. And these people, you know, if someone played a violin sonata with you, and they're at some school 10 years later, they might remember, that was such fun, you know. The other thing is take advantage of any teaching opportunity, and especially those difficult ones, which are like music appreciation for engineering majors. Because that will teach you how to teach, and that is what a university wants you to know how to do.
I would say too, consider yourself a professional as early as you can. Don't think of yourself as a student.
Well, in the sense that I had somebody say to me today, but I'm only a student. I said, what? You know, and I looked at her, I said, well, I'm only a student too. I mean, we're all students, but we're also professionals. We're people on the planet Earth, and we're all wonderful, and, you know, too much of an artificial grouping or distinction is not helpful.
And also the fear of competing. Some students would tell me, no, I'm afraid, I hate competitions. I also hated competitions, but I would not be here without those. And also, I would not be teaching in the schools where I taught without competing. You get those jobs because you compete against other incredibly wonderful musicians. And sometimes you're lucky and you get those positions. So you will never finish competing. If you take competition in the right way, which is a way to prove yourself, and to see how long you went, how far you went in your experience as a musician. You will prove yourself, you will get the feeling of sharing your musical ideas with other competitors. And I think it's just a great experience for you that will also prepare to be ready in the professional life when competitions never end. So.
Christopher can attest that we went to school with a shockingly brilliant DM student named Peter Henderson. Peter Henderson was a guy who was focused primarily on school, and he finished the doctorate at Indiana with 10 recitals in 2.5 years brilliantly. I will never forget this guy. And when all of the students believed that he would get a major job right out of school. In fact, Jeremy Dank was our teacher of 20th century and had forgotten the recording of the Carter Sonata, but only had the score. And Peter Henderson sight read the piece for the class. He could play and sight read anything. And when it came time to apply for jobs, he didn't get a single callback or make the finals or even the semifinals of anything. And finally, after years of applying, one of the schools contacted him on the short list, but he didn't get the job. And he asked them, can you please tell me what I did wrong, because I feel like I've been such a good student. And they said, yes, that's all you've done is you were a student the whole time. You have nothing on your CV that tells us that you could be a great professor.
So
Yes.
what happened to him?
Making a life in music is very much your friendships, much more than your competitions. I had a touching experience a few months ago, or couple of years ago. When I was a student at Juilliard, I had a roommate named Martin Cannon, and we remained close friends. And a couple of years ago, I went to visit him in the hospital, and he was very close to death and sleeping most of the time. And I sat there, and then he woke up, and he looked at me and he said, you know, I got you into Juilliard, meaning in the faculty. And I said, yes, I know you did, and I always tell people that. And he said, yes, I know that. And he smiled. It was the first time he smiled. And that was so gratifying for me, because, in fact, it was he who got me into Juilliard. Of course, me, because I did different things, but it was Martin who went to the president of the school and suggested me. And this is the kind of thing that happens in life. You don't have to think about it in advance, but you'll have friends, and they will turn out to be the important people in the music world, and you'll be very happy to have those friendships.
And you make those friendships, of course, in your degree programs, but festivals like this are wonderful, but also the competitions. It's not just about the competitions. I often think of competitions really as high-level conferences.
Yeah.
And once you're in the academy, there are conferences that people go to, but the competition world, so many of the people that I remember from those days
They can
are
also be
friends.
dating mixers.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, I met your wonderful husband
Yes.
in the
Busoni,
Busoni
that's
competition.
right,
That's right.
that's
Yes. I learned various repertoire.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Okay, boys and girls, so we're gonna break for this, and we have a wonderful master class coming up in about 4 minutes. And we'll get on with the day, and we'll see you guys later.